Hi, Nicole, and welcome to episode 4 of the dialogue series that we're running. And thank you for agreeing to talk to us today. For the viewers and listeners, Nicole, we'll get you to introduce yourself in a second. Pretty impressive background as a CDE, a credentialed diabetes educator, a dietitian, and a nutrition coach. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. How about we kick off with you just giving us a little bit of background about your experience and the areas that you're interested in.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. So my background is in nutrition. I've been a dietitian now for about 8 years. And it's been, I've been working with patients with diabetes for most of the time.
Yeah.
In all different areas. So it's been, in clinical, which is like inpatient. It's been outpatient. I've worked in dialysis. I have my own private practice now. It's called Demasi Nutrition. So I'm based in Los Angeles, and I see all different types of patients. A lot of them are diabetic, so it's either type 1 or type 2. Or it could be kidney disease, it could be weight loss, digestive issues. So there's, people that I see, it's never just one thing. It's usually a combination of things.
And what was it? This tends to be a question that I'm asking actually so far in this series, but what was it that got you into the diabetes space?
Yeah, I guess as a dietitian, we see a lot of patients with diabetes just because the need for a dietitian is so strong in that area. But I was seeing a lot of people kind of when they've already got to the point where their diabetes was so uncontrolled that they were now having secondary issues like kidney disease and cardiovascular disease and things like that. So I kind of wanted to get more into diabetes for learning about the prevention of other diseases, and also just to help people with better control, and give them more education, really, because I found that education was kind of sporadic in the field. You'd be diagnosed and then you might not get education from a healthcare provider for years unless you look for it yourself. So I just got into it because, first of all, I think it's really interesting. And I just was seeing so many people, I just wanted to get better at it. And also, when I did most of my work in diabetes was, I recently worked for Omnipod. So they make a tubeless insulin pump. So I had been working in an outpatient clinic before that, seeing patients, and I really got into pumps. And when I started working with Omnipod, I realized that pumps are just so cool. They're so amazing. So most of my work with type 1s and type 2s has been with Omnipod. I currently don't work for them any longer, but I did in the past, and I loved it. I learned so much about the pumps and using a pump and CGMs, all the tips and tricks of the pump world to really help with managing diabetes, and so that was really fun.
But yeah, you're certainly right. I think about that concept of when you get diagnosed, you're in a health system and there is probably help available, but you have to kind of go out looking for it. You need to go and find a diabetes educator, and you need to find an endocrinologist. And certainly finding ones that work for you can be a bit of a challenge. I know I've had experiences where, I've had an endocrinologist who would just sort of ask me the same questions every time I saw them. And I kind of started feeling like it was a bit of a waste of time because I was just sort of saying the same things and that I wasn't really getting a lot of value out of it. So I'm really interested in the kind of different areas of help that are kind of evolving in this space to, I guess, tailor to the different types of people with diabetes and their different needs. So it's interesting how you kind of found your way through that. And also, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's okay. You can finish.
Oh, I was going to jump on to talking about the Omnipod and just what your role was when you were working with Omnipod.
hmm Um, so, well, before I wanted to actually mention something that you said about, not having a lot of
Yeah,
education.
go for
I
it.
think that's really important. Um, when you first get diagnosed with type 1 especially, it is scary, right? I mean, you're now being thrown into this new world of having to live and to manage yourself 24/7. I think that those first few months or even, years when you first get diagnosed are so
Mm,
critical to teach you how to take care of your diabetes. And so if you're not getting the proper care that you need, you're going to probably learn some pretty bad habits right from the beginning. And so if you are working with somebody to help you better manage it and to help you, make realistic changes, it might not seem as overwhelming for you right in the beginning. And so you'll
yeah.
be able to better manage it moving forward. Um, and that kind of leads into the whole question about pumps. Um, I think a lot of physicians don't like to put people on pumps right away because they
Hmm.
want to make sure that they can, be A+ students, quote unquote, with their diabetes, right? So making
Yeah,
sure that they have
that
really
makes
great
sense.
blood sugar levels and they're checking their sugars and they want to make sure that A1Cs are perfect.
Yeah,
And that's not realistic. I think a lot of what I did working at Omnipod was just getting doctors to see that pumps can actually be a tool to help patients get to that point where they actually can manage their blood sugars better. Um, it's basically like a calculator, really. So it's actually taking a lot of the guesswork out of having to calculate, insulin to carb ratios and correction factors and all that stuff that can be really intimidating for people.
yeah,
Um, I do think, it's important to know you have to know how to manage diabetes. You can't just go straight to a pump. Like, that's not what I'm saying, because you need to have backup, right? But
yeah.
I think it's also really important to know what type of options are out there for you in terms of technology. And I mean, when I worked, so let me tell you a little bit about when I worked at Omnipod.
Yeah, please.
So I was a clinical sales manager. And so what that means is, um, sorry, not clinical sales manager. I was a clinical services manager.
Yeah,
And so what that means is I was part of the sales team, but I was the person who was managing all the patients that were going on the pump. So from start to finish, I would see them if they were, currently on multiple daily injections, or if they were on another pump, I would have to start them on the pump or transition them to it. And I would follow them closely for at least a few weeks after, and then all the way up to 3 months, I would do a check-in and see how they were
okay.
doing. So giving them a lot of education, teaching them how to use the pump, checking in with their doctors or other healthcare providers to make sure that that transition was smooth, helping them to figure out, all the little tips and tricks that you can do with a pump,
That's
and
interesting,
then just
actually.
making sure that they were successful.
So how I'm interested in kind of how the patients found you, or at what point you were engaging with them in that process, and how the decision around Omnipod was come to.
You mean for the patient?
Yeah, yeah. Given that
Yeah.
you work for Omnipod, but you had a hands-on role with the patient, that's probably, I suppose, in my experience, a little bit of a different approach in that companies, I think probably in Australia and the UK, where I've worked a little bit around healthcare, companies probably have a bit more of a distance from the patient.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of interested in that role where you got to have time with the patient, and whether it was an Omnipod specific clinic or something along those lines.
Yeah, it honestly depends on the rules and regulations of the country, or even from state to state, it's a little bit
Right.
different.
Interesting.
So, because Omnipod is it's medical device, it's not pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if you were just a pharmaceutical rep for a drug company, say like insulin, for
Yeah.
example, you might not actually have access to the patients. You just have to talk to the healthcare providers. But because it's a medical device, and you have to actually teach the patient how to use it, it's very hands-on.
Yeah.
Some offices actually didn't let us in. They wanted their diabetes educators or nurse educators to do all of the trainings, and they didn't want us at all. We would just train the nurses directly. But for the most part, I was doing, you know, about 90% of the trainings with the patients. And a lot of doctors don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the time to do it. Or sometimes they just don't have extra help to actually train the patient. So they welcomed our presence in the office a lot of time.
So how many pumps were available to choose from? So the endocrinologist or the CDE, you know, if they were giving a patient advice, how many pumps were available on the market to choose from for a patient in the US?
Yeah, so in my experience, a lot of offices, they like to be kind of pump neutral. So meaning they don't want to push the patient to choose any particular pump. They tell them all the options and then they let them choose on their own. Some offices are they're very picky on which ones they choose. Like some doctors will push certain pumps on people. But at the time, there was 3 main pumps. So there was the Omnipod tubeless pump. There was the Medtronic tubed pump. And at the time, there were a couple different ones. So I worked for Omnipod a couple years ago now, but now there's the closed loop system. And then before there was the, 670G. And then now there's also the Tandem pump as well. So it's mostly Medtronic, Omnipod, and Tandem.
Gotcha.
The 3 pumps available.
Okay, cool. That sounds really interesting, actually. We could probably spend quite a while on that. But I'm also really keen to actually talk a little bit about the nutrition and dietitian side of things, just to get a sense of like your background there, and because it's a really important area. You know, it's such a crucial part of the life of a diabetic, type 1 or otherwise, really. And I think it's interesting because one thing that I kind of realized recently is that through the understanding of my blood glucose levels, I've been able to develop a more intimate relationship with food. In a sense, I have a good understanding of the impact of food on my body, and that's been really kind of helpful, I suppose, overall, just in life in general. Understanding the impacts of food, and at a level that if you don't test your blood sugars, others don't necessarily have. Talk to us a bit about your work in that space in terms of dietitian and nutrition stuff, and the relevance for type 1 diabetics.
Yeah, I mean, diet is a huge role. I mean, it's not the only thing that affects blood sugars, right? But it's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that it really does affect your relationship with food.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, I mean, realistically, you can't just go and eat whatever you want. You have to think about it and how it's going to affect you later on.
Yeah.
And I mean, technically, you can't eat what you want as long as you have the right strategies to prevent your blood sugars from spiking. So like if you wanted to have, let's say, dessert, you can have it. You just have to have more insulin for it.
Yeah.
But it's the strategies around, keeping your blood sugar under control it's definitely tricky because it's on a case-by-case basis. It's just so different. So it's looking at the diet as a whole. It's looking to see, what types of patterns are evolving in your blood sugars. It's looking to see, how exercise affects it, how stress affects it. But when we talk about nutrition specifically, carbs get a bad reputation, I think, right? But you need carbs, and you know that as a type 1, as soon as your blood sugars start dropping, you need some carbohydrates. So we know that carbs are really important. But it's the type of carbohydrates that really matter, right? So you need quick carbs, but typically just when you're having low blood sugars is when you want the quick carbs. So when I mean quick carbs, I mean simple sugars like that are more processed, the ones that we say to try to limit most of the time. So, your sugar,
I love them all. I love the quick ones. I love the slow ones.
The quick ones. Yeah.
Keep going. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, so like the simple sugars are needed, and it's not like you can never have them. And I think there's this the stigma around sugar for people with diabetes, it's like, it's like the elephant in the room when it's there. It's like either you avoid it completely or you're obsessed over it. And so you can have these things. And I think it's really important to work with a dietitian to see how you can add some foods back into your diet that you really enjoy, because food is meant to be enjoyed, right? It's not meant to be feared. It serves a purpose in culture and community and family. And so I think when I work with people, I try to, I go over like, what are your favorite foods? What is your diet like? How can we incorporate these in, but make it so that you have a plan around it, right? You have a strategy to figure out what's the best way to add these foods into your diet. Now, of course, there's like the long-term effects of that. So even if your blood sugars are normal and you're eating a ton of junk food, it's still going to have other effects, right? So it's not just about your blood sugar.
Sure, yeah,
it can
absolutely.
causing all sorts of things like inflammation. It can increase your, certain foods can increase your blood pressure and cause digestive issues. So it's really about the diet as a whole and not just about your blood sugar. So did you want me to get into like
I tend to think of it like actually as a diabetic, the diet is just a little bit more important than it is for anyone else. That actually all the same things apply, excess carbohydrates are bad for anyone, and they may be just a little bit worse. And I tend to think of that applied across the board for diabetics. All of the usual things that are bad for you if you're a non-diabetic are still bad for you if you're a diabetic. They're just maybe a little bit worse. But yeah, there's certainly a group of type 1 diabetics, and type 2 is a kind of a different conversation, I think, in terms of diet, and the considerations are different, and how you approach your diet is different, because diet has partly been the reason that you've become type 2. But certainly as a type 1, I have learned, like for example, last night I had a massive bowl of pasta, fresh pasta. It was delicious. I love it. I don't think I could ever give it up. But what I have to do is I just have to be more proactive with my checking, and which, wearing a CGM allows me to do that. A pump probably would even be better to manage it. But what I did was I had this bowl of pasta. I gave myself 6 units of Nova Rapid when I had it. And then I kept checking every 15 minutes to half an hour to watch what it was doing. Before bed, I saw that it was slowly starting to drift up. I was in range. And then I gave myself another 3 units of long acting before bed and 2 units of Nova Rapid before bed. Because I knew from having this same bowl of pasta like 2 weeks ago, I knew that if I didn't, when I had that same bowl of pasta 2 weeks ago, I just gave myself the 3 units of long acting before bed, not the short acting. So this time, and I ended up at I woke up and I was like 15, which is millimoles, which is different to, I don't know what that is in your metrics. But this time I gave myself 2 units and I woke up and I was like 6. I was in range. So it worked. So that, now when I go to have that again, I have to consider multiple factors, in terms of what exercise I've done and various other things. But that now I have a bit of a strategy for that same bowl of pasta next time I come to that. But it was good to be able to eat that, have a guilty pleasure, enjoy it to the max, and then do the right things and end up waking up in range. Is such a satisfying feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's great that you say that, because it is all about trial and error, right? I mean, it's not beating yourself up for the times that you don't get it exactly right, because it's not about perfection. It's about consistency, right? And if you keep trying. If one thing doesn't work, try something else. Don't beat yourself up about it, because I see so many people just get really stressed out about their blood sugars not being in range, or they can't figure it out. It's either that maybe you just need to tweak something, or you can talk to a dietitian and they can look at everything and say, they can see patterns, right? We can see patterns. If we download your data from your CGM, we can see like, okay, well, here you might have spiked up from the pasta, but you don't realize that you were already running high because of what you ate for breakfast that day. It might not even have been the pasta. It could have been something that you had previously, but you had never came down from it. And so there's so many little things that you do have to look at that can really make a difference. And so it helps when you have a second set of eyes to look at your data to figure it all
Absolutely.
out.
So given the experience you've had in the number of patients you've dealt with and your background in nutrition, what are the big mistakes that diabetics, type 1 diabetics, will make when it comes to managing their diet? What are the things that we need to be aware of and learn from, I guess, those that are doing well?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of mistakes, it's like, I try not to label things as good or bad, because then, you kind of get like a negative stigma around it. But in terms of some of the things that I've seen, it comes from a lack of being educated by the healthcare providers. So that could be like, I had someone recently who was accidentally giving themselves, um, short-acting insulin, but skipping the long-acting insulin because he thought he only had to take it when his blood sugars were high. So he wasn't taking any long-acting at all. He just kept giving himself short-acting. One of the biggest things that I've seen recently in terms of diet, though, would be keto diet, or any of these fad diets that are out there.
Yeah.
The keto diet is interesting because there's a lot of studies that show, if you do it the wrong way, which means if you're having a lot of food that's high in, red meat, processed meat like sausage and bacon, and just a lot of animal protein in general, it can actually be pro-inflammatory. So, I mean, it can increase oxidative stress in the body, which can then lead to other issues like cardiovascular disease. It can also be quite taxing on the kidneys long term, especially if you're already at high risk for kidney disease, like if you have uncontrolled blood sugars. That's the biggest one I'd have to say right now, to give you a short answer.
Do you get into a lot of discussion, debate with people about these topics? Because there's a big keto movement going on out there. I think some people would look at keto as being potentially a helpful thing because it's low in carbs, obviously, and therefore you're not going to get the spikes with your blood sugars. And I've dabbled with intermittent fasting for a while now. I will just have black coffee most mornings of the week, and then I won't eat sometimes until like 1 or 2. And some days I'll just have some nuts and a piece of fruit until dinner as well. And that I find actually my blood sugar, I actually feel clearer. And this isn't keto, right? This is intermittent fasting more so than keto. But they have, there's crossover. Right. There's some similarities in them. But I find that I feel clearer. I feel generally better in myself if I give my gut some time, some space, a break, effectively. So yeah, how do you kind of handle those? Do you have a kind of fixed attitude to fasting and keto, or is it on a patient basis?
It's on a patient by patient basis, definitely. I mean, generally, I don't recommend keto specifically just because we don't know a lot of the long-term effects of it yet. And that's because a lot of the studies that are done, they can't actually get them to be long-term studies because it's such a hard diet to follow. Yeah. If you're actually doing a true keto diet when you're in ketosis for a long period of time, it's difficult to follow. And the problem is that if you're cutting out these foods, like if you cut out carbs for a long time, sometimes that can cause, obsession over carbs moving forward. Yeah. And so then it kind of becomes like a little bit of an unhealthy relationship with food. And plus you do need carbohydrates.
What about intermittent fasting? Am I doing the wrong thing?
So this is another one where it's tough to say, because intermittent fasting, there's so many different types. There's, people that will fast for just 12 hours a day overnight. There's the 16-hour fast. Yeah. Some people fast for a whole 24 hours. So when you say intermittent fasting, it really depends on the person and what it means. So I don't recommend going long periods of time without food, just because of the fact that you do need vitamins and minerals to help your body function properly, right? So it's not just about again, it's not just about blood sugars and it's not just about energy levels. It's also getting the right amount of nutrition for your body so that you don't,
Absolutely.
lose too much weight or lose muscle mass. There are studies that show that intermittent fasting can actually aid in longevity, so living
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
But
It
you
cleans up
really
free
have to,
radicals and things like that. Is that a
what
real thing? Cleans up free radicals, so it gives your body time to go and focus on parts of on unhealthy things that might exist in your body. I mean, there's even evidence out there around fasting. I think that cancer patients, for example, are prescribed fasting, I believe.
yeah, and again, it's kind of a slippery slope because it really depends on the person. I mean, if you're someone with cancer and you are already like wasting and you're losing muscle mass, that can decrease your immune system even further. So you wouldn't want to necessarily rely on intermittent fasting to help like cure your cancer, but I'd say it depends. It's hard for me to say specifically, but with the intermittent fasting, I think one of the reasons why people do it is because, they want to limit their calorie intake. And if it's for, weight loss, a lot of studies have shown that no matter how you limit your calories, whether it's through keto, whether it's through intermittent fasting, or just a regular, limit your calories diet, over time, people lose the same amount of weight. But with the keto diet, people tend to gain it back later on because it's not really a long-term strategy for people. And so when you go back to eating things like carbs, a lot of times you can gain back that weight pretty quickly, especially if you're eating, the wrong type of carbs. And because, if you're somebody that's been restricting carbohydrates for a long time, those carbs then become kind of almost, like you got to have them for certain people, not everyone.
All of this talking about carbs and foods making me hungry, actually. I'm looking at my clock and I'm wondering what time lunch is. So we'll kind of start to wrap things up a little bit. I could talk about, I find keto and fasting and all of this nutrition stuff. I really find it a fascinating topic. We could probably run a whole session just on intermittent fasting, right?
Yeah.
So I think just kind of one question to finish off. I'm curious on whether you kind of have any insight into where we're moving with diet, like what the future holds. I mean, I think people, fasting's always been around. For example, keto's kind of, arguably been around, but these are very topical things now. What's on the horizon in these types of areas? What are the diets we're going to be seeing in 10 years' time?
I think a lot of the research that's out right now is kind of leaning towards a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
And that's been, I mean, when we talk about diet, this is why I don't really like fad diets too much. I mean, some of them have their benefits in different ways, and that's why I can't give you a straight answer on which diet is best for you.
Yeah.
But just in general, a diet that's balanced with, carbs, protein, and lots of vegetables is going to probably be the best option for you. And there's a lot of research that shows that animal protein specifically can increase insulin resistance. So meaning if you use insulin, your body is not going to be actually use that insulin as efficiently. And so it can affect your blood sugars that way. And also just the long-term effects of animal protein has been shown to increase inflammation and cardiovascular disease. So I'm seeing a lot of plant-based diets. I personally recommend plant-based diet for most people.
Do you do plant-based diet yourself?
I do most of the time.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because it's so high in fiber. And high fiber diets help to feed your gut, and so your digestive tract. And I could do a whole episode just on gut health. But gut health is so important for anyone. And when we say gut health, we mean digestive health. And that's basically, your mouth through your intestines all the way down to, the colon. And you have little bacteria that run all the way down, and you need to feed that bacteria and make sure that it's healthy. And they're finding now that the more you feed these healthy bacteria, the lower your risk for disease is. And diets that are high in sugar, high in processed foods, tend to cause unhealthy gut bacteria that can increase your risk for diabetes and all sorts of other things. So mostly plants. Half your plate should be low carbohydrate vegetables and a little bit of
really fascinating, really fascinating subject and topics. And I'd love to kind of explore this more. And so maybe we could look at some of these subjects for a future episode. Thank you so much for giving us time. So you're in LA in the US.
Yes.
If there is anyone listening and they do want some help with nutrition, diabetes, where can they find you?
You can find me on my website. It's NicoleDemasi.com. And it's NicoleDemasi.com. And I'm also on Instagram. It's Nutrition by Nikki. And then I have a Facebook page, Demasi Nutrition, as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks,
Have a nice
Pete.
day.